The idea that a country even can be secular is somewhat new in human history. For millennia, Christians in Western regions have lived in countries that were officially identified as Christian. What happened? Even more significantly, we didn't always call it Western civilization. We used to call it Christendom, because the countries within it had such a strong commitment to a shared Christian cultural identity that it superseded their national political borders and united them under one sort of classification, Christendom. This Christian culture wasn't just symbolic or just theoretical. It was strong enough that it inspired millions of European peasants across multiple centuries to pick up torches, pitchforks, and swords and travel halfway across the known world to battle a threat against their Christian empire, which were the Muslims. These Christians understood that their faith wasn't merely something in their heads. It had to come out of their heads and be exposed in their actions among each other, their actions within their church, within their communities, within their countries, and even to the entire world. Christians, where does your faith's influence end? Do you tie off your faith as far as your arms can reach? Does it not go any farther than that? How about your church? Does your faith exceed the boundaries of your church? I would posit to you that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He doesn't give Christians a mark of delineation where the influence of their faith should stop. And so when we see a threat like Islam, which is something that has been in a long-running battle against Christendom for literally thousands of years, it is not noble for us to pretend that this history doesn't exist and that suddenly, for whatever reason, we're just over it and we're going to coexist with Muslims even though they, actively hate us. It is not time for that. We can express Christian love for even Muslims without giving them the keys to our house. A lot of Christians believe that the Crusades were a mistake. It was an example of Christians run amok, following the flesh and being violent for no good reason. But nothing could be further from the truth. Radical Islam is a cancer. It spread in the Middle East, took over empires, and grew into a very powerful fighting force. And when it knocked on the doors of Christendom and started eating up chunks of the Holy Land, Christians in Europe were called by their leaders, both political and religious, offices which often tended to overlap, to go and resist the Muslim incursions, and they did. There's no evidence that these believers hated Muslims just for existing. They wanted them to convert. The more powerful emotion was not hate, but love for their own people. And so there's a certain unfortunate line of thinking among Christians that because we need to love the Muslims, that we should welcome them in. We should have no objections to them entering our countries, and that our chief goal should be the gospel. And if, even for a moment, we begin to consider the implications to our own national heritage, to our own cultural identity, to the security of our borders, we are getting distracted from the gospel because our chief goal needs to be evangelism. These two things are not in conflict. We can love the Muslims. We can try to evangelize them. We can avoid hating them, but we must also love our own people. We must put a stop to the spread of radical Islam. For thousands of years, believers have been aware of the generational animosity between the followers of the false prophet Muhammad and the followers of Jesus Christ. This ultimately is a battle that is motivated by the ultimate struggle between good and evil. But unfortunately, in the last few hundred years, Christians and Westerners seem to have forgotten this conflict that previous generations of believers have been painfully aware of. Millions of lives have been lost through the millennia to protect European and Western lands from Muslim incursions. Battles have even been fought on what is today European soil to push out the Muslims, and sometimes it took hundreds of years to accomplish this. We are right now, by allowing Muslims free immigration into our countries in the West, and in some cases just totally unfettered access to our borders. Recently in Spain, we had 60,000 Muslim Moroccan migrants just rush over the border. And it was such an unignorable crisis that even the left had to kind of clutch their pearls a little bit and grapple with the consequences of the policies that they've been pushing. But we are not resisting this in any serious way whatsoever. At very most, we're putting a couple police officers there and saying, well, that's too far. If you're going to invade our countries, you've got to slow down and invade us legally. In past days, we would have assembled an army to push these people out because that's the stakes. Once you let them in, there is no nice way to get them out, and you will be left with a decision between evicting people who have lived with you for generations, which is a very painful and difficult thing to do, or just letting them stay and giving up what people have spent generations fighting to protect. We can't allow it to happen. And so we need to, as Christians in the United States, find ourselves and reclaim the Christian identity that we used to have. Christians didn't used to be limited to, I'm a Christian in my heart. No, you were a Christian in your heart, in your family, in your church, in your country, and in the world. And as Christians have forgotten that they are also supposed to be Christians in the world has gone to pot, and Christians' place in the world has been heavily diminished. Christians need to reclaim that. Assert your Christian identity with fellow believers across the world in support of a new Christendom that will help us protect the lands in which our people live, and which, through the assertive arm of godly violence, will protect the opportunity for good people to grow up and live godly lives, from which they can go out and then evangelize and go on the offensive and convert, not through violence, but through the love of the gospel, millions of even Muslims to the Lord.